Howdy, howdy everyone. Welcome back to my tiny corner of the internet. So this video is going to be an interesting one is because I kind of want to tell a little bit of a life story. I want to open it up with a little bit of life stories because back when I was a kid, my old man's brother, my uncle, was going through some financial difficulties, and he lost his job, he was going to lose his house, and so he was doing a fire sale to recoup some of the losses, by selling off a lot of his stuff. And he had this very nice mountain bike that he had. It was, in the hundreds of dollars. And so he knew he had to sell it off to recoup some of the costs that was going to happen about him losing his job and all that sorts of stuff, right? And so what happened was one of his best buddies that he assumed was his best buddies, he was trying to sell it off saying, I really need some help. And, because like I'm in a tough position. And do you think you could buy this bike from me? And because nobody else was buying it, because he needed some money to recoup his losses. So his friend said, you know what, I'll give you $20 for the bike. And my uncle basically says the bike's not worth $20. It's worth around $200. He said, well, yeah, I know, but since you're losing your job and you need this money more than I need that bike, I know you'll take it. And of course, he was right. He took it. So I kind of want to talk a little bit out of a life lesson on one of the reasons why I hate the left, why I hate virtue signaling and empathy politics, is because the interesting part is that a lot of the times the left doesn't understand the power of negotiation or being in a position of weakness. They don't know what that's like because they think that if they wag their fingers hard enough and morally down-do something hard enough, people are going to understand. But that's not how it works. It never has worked that way. And I'd even argue today, people are less empathetic than they've ever been in our history. I'm going to be honest with you. I think people are the least empathetic they've ever been. I think we're the least empathetic era. And so empathy politics, which is the primary politics that people on the left engage in, where they just assume if they morally shame somebody enough that it's just going to change the situation into being fair. That's not how this works. Like, the majority of the world, I'm going to tell you this right now, if you're one of those people, it's like the world doesn't care if you end up homeless, living out of your car, and in jail. People are going to forget about you. Nobody cares about you. And so, like, making an appeal to morality and finger wagging, I hate to tell you, you go through life like that, nobody's going to care about you, man. And so the thing is that what do you do in the face of a cold and apathetic world that doesn't care about your existence? What do you do? Because, like I said earlier, nobody cares if you end up living out of your car. I mean, I dare you. Okay, if you're one of those like moralist empathizers and you want to morally shame everybody, I dare you to live out of your car for a month. And as soon as you start looking like a homeless person, watch how cruel people will be to you. Nobody gives a shit about you. And I want you to basically try to appeal to their empathy and see if they change their mind about you. You're going to find yourself incredibly frustrated, angry, and contemptuous and hateful at the world. I promise you that. But please, if you think that empathy politics is the key ticket to changing anything, I dare you to go live out of a van, start looking like you're homeless, and then carrying the same logic and finger wagging at people. I promise you they'll probably just call the cops on you and you'll get the shit beaten out of you by some asshole cop. Nobody cares about empathy. Nobody cares about you. At the end of the day, you have to find a way to navigate in the world that's going to work out for you, that is going to lead to a prosperous future for yourself, because nobody else will. No matter how much you want to be, if you continue to try and be a moralist about this, you're just going to find yourself increasingly hateful towards the world. I promise you that. Again, do the homelessness experiment and see how people treat you, and see how they respond to when you try to play empathy politics with them. They're just going to get disgusted. With that being said, how do you navigate in the world in respect to that? So what alternative form of politics and navigation am I trying to propose to anybody who is from that branch of empathy politics, leftism, if you want to call it that? I want to more or less teach you how to negotiate, how to bargain your worth. Because the thing is that nobody is going to give a shit about you until you have something of value to them. And this is something I know that a lot of the moralist left is probably going to get really upset about, that is, how do you negotiate with somebody to bring their interest in line with yours? You have to offer something of value to somebody else for them to be interested in what you have, right? And you can't just give it freely, is because, again, if you have something of value to somebody else and you don't know how to negotiate with it, somebody will take advantage of what you have that they want and use it for their own gain and then completely screw you over. In fact, I've been in workplaces like that, where, you know, they want you doing the majority of the work towards the project, but they don't want to give you social credit for it. And so that's kind of thing. How do you navigate a situation where where you're in a position of weakness, where you have to do a job and, you know, you need to get recognition for what you're doing, but, you know, you have a boss that doesn't want to give you recognition for the work that you're contributing, okay? And that's the difficult thing. How do you negotiate from a position of weakness? Is because you can finger wag about how unfair the situation is, and we're in the least empathetic age ever, and nobody's gonna care. It's brutal. You can get mad at me for saying this sorts of stuff. I don't think you will, to be honest, is because you know deep down in your heart what I'm saying is true, is that you have to find an alternative way to act within a world that couldn't care less if you're dead in a ditch, okay? And I'm not trying to be overly grim here. I'm just trying to basically give you an alternative way to act, is because the reason why the left is so ineffective nowadays, especially when it comes to politics, you know, the protesting, nobody gives a shit. You know, honestly, like, listen to every conservative on what they talk about with leftist protesters. I remember in 2020, and I'm not a supporter of Chaz, because I think Chaz was a dumb shit thing to do in the first place, because it was done by anarchist dipshits who just didn't know what they were doing. But that's neither here nor there. I had a friend who's a conservative. When Chaz was going down, he was saying, you know what they need to do? They need to bring down the military and crush this rebellion and then make an example out of them and use heavy stick politics to show that we don't give a shit. And that's kind of an interesting thing, is that is the response you're going to get. It's no difference if you're homeless and living out of a van and you look like a filthy person, you know. That's the response you're going to get, except it's going to be coming from an aura of disgust from jackasses who think that you're less than human because you're homeless, okay? And so, what do you do to navigate this? How do you get in a position where you basically have a position to bargain with it? And like I said earlier with the boss, right? You have to know what you have of value to negotiate in a relationship. What do you bring to the table that it's of value to other people? And this is something the left doesn't know how to do. They for some reason think, again, if you just finger wag and virtue signal enough, that all of a sudden people are just going to listen and fall in line. That's not how this works, okay? So you have to first, A, bring something of value to the table, and then B, also know how to negotiate with it to basically satisfy their interests. You need to get something of value from somebody else. And so you bring what you have to the table, and you keep it locked down under key to basically show, well, we're not going to fulfill your interest until you fulfill our interest. Like I said, I've had bosses like this in the workplace. Everybody is familiar. You can go to plenty of comment sections throughout YouTube, and, you know, there's no shortage of people complaining about how they do all the work for the team, but they get none of the credit, and the boss basically gives credit and social credit and recognition to the person he likes on a project, okay? And I'm very familiar with that. I have dealt with these people before, okay? And so the way you handle it is you got to look, okay, let's start with this position. I want you to look at yourself in the mirror. What do you bring to the table in terms of skills? What can you do that other people can't do? Because that's the first way to find out what you can, what you bring to the table as a value to the bargaining table, okay? That's what you bring. In my case, it's that I had specialized skills that nobody else had. And so when it came to the project, you know, when it came to that, and I knew my boss was yanking my chain, and he wasn't giving me credit and recognition for what I was doing. And yes, it's no hidden secret that I work as an engineer. And so what happened is that I kind of sat at the table, and he was consistently yanking my chain. He had the mentality of my conservative friend that was like, oh, just bring in the army and beat him down, and then he'll eventually fall in line bullshit. And so what happened was he was playing that game with me, when it came to what I was contributing to the project, you know, expecting me to do the majority of the work, and then also not giving me credit and politically neutering my project when it came to the workplace. What did I do to get around that, to bring my boss in line, to bring him back to the bargaining table? A, I reevaluated myself, recognized what skills I brought to the table in the first place, because this guy was consistently trying to tear me down. He was trying to put me back into my place, and just, you know, he was playing power politics with me, like I said in the last video about the United States with China. He was trying to basically make me bend a knee for absolutely no other reason. There was no incentive. It was all stick, nothing of worthwhile. Also, no carrot on reason why I should cooperate with him. Okay? Now, you might think because you're an employee, you have no bargaining power, but let me tell you where you're wrong. So he was playing these games with me, and what happened was, as I realized, I looked at myself in the mirror and said, okay, what do I bring to the table that is of value to my employer to make him come back to the table, renegotiate better terms and conditions socially to give me recognition for what I was doing at the company. Okay? Because, you know, everybody likes to meme about how if you work at a company, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you're disposable. Yes, that's true. But what do you bring to the table of value to the company they should be reminded of to keep you as an employee? Okay, what do you bring to the table? What makes you so special? Be honest here, because everybody has interest. Okay, if you're working on a project as an engineer, you have to know what your employer wants of you, what you can do that nobody else can do, or it would be very difficult to do or very expensive to do. Okay, I reevaluated my position. I looked at what I brought to the table and realized this guy was just trying to play power politics over me because he thought I was some autistic retard nerd that could just be beaten into line and he'll just do his job. And so I realized, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to basically say, you know what? I'm going to bend the knee. And I'm going to say, you know what, boss? You know more than me on how to do this project. In fact, why don't you show me how to do it? And so what I did deliberately was, I started acting my wage, as I call it. I said, if you're going to consistently try to make me bend the knee and tell me I don't know much, and then at the same time, expect me to do the majority of work on this project, I'm going to basically say, I don't know what I'm doing. You know more than me. And that was the most powerful phrase I ever used on my boss to basically signal him is that, you know, it's going to be very difficult to do this project unless if you give me the proper support and recognition to actually do this project. Because here's the thing about when it comes to engineering work, is that it's very hard to bring on a new person on a specialized project without spending at least a year or two just to get them to understand what the project is before they can contribute an ounce of value to it, okay? And my position, because I'm the only one who'd been working on it for a couple of years, you know, it would be incredibly expensive and very difficult to replace me if they wanted to bring somebody to take my job for me. Because, you know, you have junior engineers, which are just fresh graduates from college. They don't really know what they're doing. And on top of that, it's like, you know, their technical skills are fairly new. That takes years to refine on its own right. And then even if you brought a more experienced engineer, it would take time for them to just understand what was going on in the project in the first place to actually do it. And so I recognized my position is that if I leave, he's going to spend the next 3 years trying to hire somebody to replace me. And, you know, he's going to sink a ton of money into a project for somebody just to read it and understand it before they even contribute an ounce of value to it. Okay? And that was the bargaining power I had at the table. And as soon as I started, you can call it quiet quitting or whatever, but more or less I was acting my wage and I started saying, you know what, you know more than me on how to solve this problem. Why don't you show me how to do it? Which he didn't have that knowledge or expertise to do it. You know, 6 months down the line, you know, during the performance review, he gives a positive review and he says, you know, we really appreciate the skills and talents you bring to this team, and then tries to extend an olive branch of peace and said that, you know what, the only thing that I have a problem with is that somebody who withholds their wisdom and expertise from the rest of the team. That, you know, it's just a pet peeve of mine. And I kind of looked at him because 6 months ago he was saying the exact opposite thing to me. And I said, yeah, I told him, you know, politely back, it's like, I don't mind sharing my expertise with anybody, but I don't like it being met with hostility. And I told him very politely that why, and in politically correct terms and negotiating table terms, why I was basically doing that sort of stuff. There's a lot of two-faced language in this cutthroat corporate world, and strangely enough, but, you know, I basically signaled to him very properly why I was basically not as gung-ho about doing the project and basically just kind of quietly checking out, which, you know, he extended an olive branch of, you know, for that, and, you know, we decided to work after that. So, but the reason it ended that way, and it wasn't a negative performance review or a write-up that came from that, is because I had something of value, and I left a branch on the table saying I'm willing to cooperate, and I know for a fact that, you know, you're going to spend the next 3 to 5 years training somebody else just to understand the project before you can actually bring an ounce of value to the project to basically, you know, have any meaningful progress on this project. And so I said, you know what? You're going to give me the recognition I want, or you can spend the next 3 to 5 years. Of course, like through a whole bunch of politically correct language and corporate cutthroat jargon garbage, right? But you get the point, right? I knew my value, I negotiated with that, and I signaled to him that, you know, do you want to spend, you know, 3 to 5 years training somebody else to do my job because you want to yank my chain and pretend not to give credit to me what I'm doing, because you want to play power politics? It brought him right back in line. It was, you know, the funny part is that if you talk to the majority of leftists about how to negotiate with employers, you know, they'll talk about collective bargaining power and, you know, worker strikes and all that sorts of stuff. And you're not wrong, but they parrot it without an ounce of thought, but then go back to the same virtue signaling logic where they assume that if they just use empathy politics, people are going to listen. Do you think my boss would have said, well, you know, I don't think it's fair that you're not giving me recognition for all my fucking credit on this project? And you know, do you think he would have listened if I had done that instead of basically said, do you want to spend the next 3 to 5 years hiring somebody else and just training them? What do you think is more effective? In that, if you were in my position, okay, and you're a leftist who is reliant on moralists and empathizer politics, if you were in my position, what do you think is going to be more effective? You know, signaling to your boss that it can be incredibly difficult to finish a project and you're going to have fun hiring another person and spending the next 3 to 5 years training them just to do the same project that you're already doing, them sinking them a ton of money, or saying, oh my god, I just think it's not fair, it's just not right that you're not giving me the recognition I deserve for this project. What do you think is going to, you know, make them, what do you think is going to get you what you want faster, okay? I bet you would say, after hearing that story, probably the former, okay? But that's because I negotiated with bargaining chips I had. And I've done this with, like, landlords, too. Okay, you know, I can tell you, maybe I'll make a video on the horrible instances of the horrible landlords that me and my girlfriend have had to deal with, and how I had to negotiate with them. But the thing is that you have to negotiate from a position of power to get your way. You have to have bargaining chips to basically leverage your weight against. Otherwise, you know, finger wagging and moralism, it's not going to get you very far. Okay, let's go back to worker strikes. I want to talk to you about worker strikes, okay? Because effectively what I did was I slung my own weight and I said, you know, you're going to give me this or I'm not going to give you that, okay? This is why I don't care about protesting. Now let's talk about worker strike. It's no different than worker strike. Let's talk about the railroad workers that were going to go on strike right before the midterms of 2022. That was shut down by Congress in November of 2022, okay? It's no different of a relationship. So, the railroad workers were going to go on strike because I believe, if I can remember correctly, it wasn't even about pay, it was about vacation days. Because they work very unscrupulous hours and it's not fun to do, okay? But they're also a vital part of our economy. They transport the vast majority of goods and resources, especially coal to power the power plants, through the national railway system. And that's kind of the interesting thing. You can find YouTube videos of where they're transporting coal across the United States to power plants so they can power the United States. I think most, when it comes to consumer goods, it's driven through trucks, but, you know, when it comes to certain bare natural resources like timber, coal, these things are done through the railway system. There are also a couple other things, I could be wrong, you know, fluids, you know, ammonia, you know, other types of things like, you know, bare, like, you know, products, natural resources. This is done through the railway system. And so, if the railroad workers collectively went on strike, they could paralyze the entire national economy. Now, you might be, that's a scary thought, but that's the point. Because the railroad workers produce value to the rest of society that is value. That is bargaining power that you can't just ignore. Okay, that's value somebody brings to the table. It's no different with my job, okay? Because I had something that I was bringing to the table of value, I was able to negotiate from a position of power rather than weakness. And the same goes for the railroad workers. And evidence goes to show itself in that late 22, Nancy Pelosi, and I said in the last video, if I can remember correctly, I talked about the hypocrisy of Nancy Pelosi being a free market capitalist in one sense, and then an altruist socialist when it comes to shutting down railroad workers. She's not even a socialist, she's just a capitalist. Let's be real here. But that's neither here nor there. And so the railroad workers have some kind of bargaining power with society when it comes to their jobs. You can't just replace a railroad worker overnight. Let's be real here. You can't just put out, oh god, maybe there's like 3,000 railroad workers. What, are you going to put up 3,000 LinkedIn posts to basically replace all those roles in enough time? No. If all the workers decide to go on strike, it's going to paralyze the national economy. Nancy Pelosi and the ruling class realized this. So here's what they did. They went through Congress and they outlawed the strike. But here's the thing. Why should anybody ever respect that? Because this is the thing. This is bargaining power that real workers have. This is what ordinary people have. So here's kind of the thing. Even though they outlawed it, they don't have to. What are they going to do? Say the railroad workers going to strike, okay, and they want to outlaw it, and Congress wants to morally finger wag. It's against the law to go on strike, railroad workers. If you want better pay for your families and, you know, better conditions for your families, you know, well, too bad, because I'm a ruling class bourgeois prick, and therefore, like, you have to do as I said. That's bullshit. Even if they do it through the law. Okay, here's what you can do, okay? What happens if they decide to, you know what, the railroad workers decided, you know what, we're not going to listen to what Congress says. We don't give a shit what Congress says. Because Congress, you know, every single member of Congress, senator and House of Representatives, the vast majority of them are multimillionaires. If the railroad workers said, you know what, we don't give a shit that you're going to basically use the power of the state to shut us down, because that's typically what the capitalist state always does anyways, you know, we're going to go on strike anyways. What can they do? They're going to bring out the National Guard. They're going to shoot workers. They're going to throw them in jail. You know, that's kind of funny. But what? Let's analyze this position. Okay, the railroad workers go on strike and they break the law and they decide, you know what? We don't give a shit that you're going to finger wag from Washington, D.C. about what ordinary American workers want when they want to take care of their families. You know, we're going to go on strike anyways. What can Congress do? What can they do from a position of power? You could say, well, they have the power of the state to do whatever the fuck they want. Like, you could say that all you want. But what can they meaningfully do? Deploy the National Guard? Throw them in jail? You know, the funny part is, that still means that they're striking is because they're not working their jobs. You know, throw all free market capitalist voluntarist logic aside about the railroad workers, because I know capitalists never, you know, are consistent about the rules that they actually say they follow by, right? But what can they do? They're going to shoot railroad workers? Oh, cool. They're still not working the railways, and people are still not getting their goods. So again, you're still not getting your way. You can kill people. And in fact, if you decided to mass shoot the railroad workers, you know, how are you going to tell the American people that you shot American workers who just wanted a better standard of living for their families just to enrich a few greedy capitalists? They don't have much bargaining power. Put that in perspective, okay? If the railroad workers decided to strike anyways against the bourgeois state, the ruling class has no bargaining chips. It's because the railroad workers are the ones that produce value for civilization. They could shoot the fuckers, and they would still not get what they want, and they would probably devastate the national economy. Not only would they destroy the economy, but they would be shooting fathers of families of this country who just want a better standard of living for their families to enrich a few greedy capitalists. The ruling class doesn't win in any sort of way if the workers decided to strike, from a PR standpoint or a material standpoint, okay? And so that is bargaining power. Even though they have the power of the state, they have the power of the U.S. military. If the railroad workers, you know, decided to collectively strike and did not show up to work for whatever reason, maybe they just want to sit home and fucking smoke pot and play video games. I fucking hate pot, but whatever. You know, and they decided to do that. You know, all those roles would have been empty. You know, goods are not going to get delivered. It would collapse the national economy for probably a couple of months. And, you know, like, that's bargaining power that that railroad worker group has, okay? Now, I don't think they fully recognize that, which I was kind of disappointed at, but that's something nobody talks about. But that's bargaining power that you have that you don't realize. Is because, again, think through the logic. You go through with striking as a railroad worker. All the railroad workers, you know, we're going to go sit on our ass, smoke pot, and play video games, right? What can they do? What is their bargaining chip? It's not that much, is it? Okay? And that's the way I want the left to think, okay? That's the way I want you to think. Is because nobody's God in this world. If somebody is a God in this world, if your opponent's a God in this world, and they can do whatever the fuck they want, and they can just dictate terms and conditions from above, well, then you know what? You might as well just, you know, bow your knee and start praying for forgiveness, because honestly, you're toast, okay? But none of these people that you're dealing with are gods. They have interest, okay? They're not above reproach. And just like the railroad worker strike example, you know, you can bring them in line back to the negotiating table. Like I said, as much as they want to finger wag and use the power of the state to crush American workers, what choices do they really have? Are they going to deploy the National Guard? No. Call bluff. Allow them call bluff on the ruling class and let them show their true colors. Because again, if they shoot American workers, again, what are they going to tell the American public through their propaganda apparatus known as the mainstream media when they shot American workers who quite literally just want a better standard of living for their families just to enrich a few fucking capitalists? Okay? That's how you bargain. That's how you bring somebody back to the negotiating table. Because you have something of value that they have, that they want, that you bring them back to the table and you renegotiate the terms that are beneficial to yourself. Okay? And the reason why this is such a necessary thing is because if you want to have better bargaining chips to bargain against somebody in a position of power, you need to put yourself in a better position. I know a lot of leftists get mad at trade unionism. I'm not necessarily a trade unionist in the sense that I believe trade unionism is an end-all be-all for all things. But I recognize the need for unions to argue for better bargaining power, because the thing is, if you get increased pay, okay, I want to give you an example. If you had a choice, if you're at a shitty job, but you have 100 grand in your bank account, right, and you can leave at any point in time, right, are you less likely or more likely to tolerate a shitty boss and a shitty company if you have 100K in your bank account? I would say you'd be less likely to tolerate it. And that's good, because you have bargaining power at the table. You can say, you know what? I can sit on my ass for 3 months unemployed and still pay rent, and then probably apply for other jobs in the meantime and still live semi-comfortably, you know, with this money in the bank. Maybe you got like $1,400, you're living out of a studio, $1,400 a month for a studio, 1 bed, 1 bath, maybe, who cares, right? But you have bargaining chips that have you in a better position than somebody else who's living paycheck to paycheck with your company and boss that you can leverage to say, you know what? I don't feel like working here, because that's bargaining power. And so, you know, a lot of leftists might decry trade unionism, but the thing is when you argue for better benefits, you know, they're going to argue that this is going to placate the working class. I don't think it will. I think everybody has been living paycheck to paycheck to some degree, that even if we were to get those benefits, we would try and use that to leverage us into a better position. Okay? So you use unionism and trade unionism to get better benefits for the working class. They say it's going to placate the working class. I don't think that's the case. I think that you can use that. What that's going to do is that's going to put the working class to be in a better bargaining position to argue for better terms and conditions in the next round. Like I said, if every union member or worker had 100K in his bank account and had a shitty boss, do you think they would be more likely to tolerate his ass or less likely? And that if those are hard-won benefits and concessions won by the working class, then I'm going to be real with you. You're less likely to tolerate some employer's bullshit. So the thing is trade unionism isn't a bad thing, but it's not an end-all solution to everything. Obviously, it's not. But the thing is, you have to know how to negotiate with your weight to basically put you in a better position to negotiate on better terms, right? Because if you make a concession, you can use that concession as bargaining chips in the next negotiation at another place. That's the whole point of mutual aid networks, okay? Say you have one union that is on a strike, okay? Have other unions chip in mutual aid to basically sustain the strike, so they can still feed their families and take care of their friends, okay? That is the point, because we need to stop thinking moralistically and trying to over-empathize everything and start thinking logically, rationally, and concisely. We know what we want. Now we have to learn to bargain from it. And maybe that's my engineering brain autistic ass thinking in these terms and conditions, but it's always driven me up the walls, because I've found the moralists and the empathizers have been absolutely useless in my life and getting into a better position than I was previously in. Because, you know, believe it or not, just whining and complaining about things and expecting empathy from somebody else just doesn't work. The right will never listen to you. Nobody will listen to you. Nobody cares about you. Okay? This world's cold. You got to know how to negotiate in it to your benefit, otherwise you're going to be dead in the ditches or some shit. Now, it's hyperbolic, but you get my point. Nobody cares about you, okay? And the sooner you accept that reality, the sooner you can acknowledge it, move forward, and know how to navigate in it. And that's all this video is about. I want you to navigate better for yourself. So everything I'm saying, it's not just about union strikes and worker strikes. This is a life lesson I want you to take to heart on how to negotiate from a position of strength. Is because when you're in a position of weakness, just like my uncle was, when he was losing his house and his job, where he had to sell his $200 bike for $20 out of desperation. I don't want you to be in a position of weakness either, is because the only one who's got your own back is yourself. Okay? You can either listen to the other dipshits and the upper middle class white yuppies talk about empathy 24/7, or you can listen to my advice. I promise you, if you're not a part of that upper middle class aura, okay, where you have that rich family that can take care of you if things don't work out, like, you know, you're gonna find this advice more useful than theirs, is because they have the room to be empathetic. They have the wealth to be empathetic. Okay, you know, the world does not care about you, man. So yeah, I hope some of this this video was more of a life lesson. That's why it's so long. I didn't want to basically do it, because like what I'm saying here is not just for collective bargaining and worker strikes. It's for you as a worker, as an individual in life, to know where your position is in the world and negotiate from it for better terms and conditions. Even as an individual, this advice has done me well. It's done me a lot of good in my life to recognize, rather than just morally finger wagging saying, I disapprove this, I downdude this, is that when you think more logically, rationally, and know what you bring to the table and know what your opponent wants, that you can negotiate for what you want. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to get what you want out of life, and I want you to have a decent and prosperous life. But, you know, you can take what I say or you can leave it. Yeah, it's up to you. But this is just me having a heart-to-heart with you, is because, honestly, I don't think this gets emphasized enough in leftist circles on how people actually act, think, and negotiate. So if you enjoyed this video, share it to a friend, like. Also, the funny part is if you like my videos and you want to see more content like this, the algorithm does not really recommend my content, so there's a little bell notification icon. If you change from personalized to all, you'll be able to see every time I upload new content. So I know that's the thing is that, like, default, even though you subscribe, it only shows you my content that is personalized. But if you want to see all my content, click the all button, and you'll be updated every time I upload a new video. So it was nice having this chat with you. Hopefully you took something of value from this video. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off because it is quite literally right at the 30-minute mark. I didn't expect this to be as long as it did. But I hope you found something of value. But you have a nice day, guys.